Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another G News update. Well, pictures have emerged today of a pretty unfit-looking Prime Minister standing amongst British troops over in the UK. Here we see the reason why Christopher Luxon's main suit button looks like it's been under a lot of pressure, and he has chosen to stand amongst British troops this morning because perhaps it was more of an interesting photo op than really just standing outside number 10 Downing Street with Sir Keir Starmer. In fact, over on Reuters, we've also seen that the shoulder-gripping cringe and embarrassment that we feel extended to the King, but it was actually filtered out by the New Zealand Herald, who didn't want us to see the fact that this Prime Minister was manhandling the King over in the UK. On top of this news, we've got a virtual media blackout on the way that the Police Minister, Mark Mitchell, graciously posted an Instagram post on his social media account which described Haka from TPM as a person whose ancestors were from China and therefore yellow Vikings, which was an appalling racist slur from Mark Mitchell and his office, and it didn't take much time for the New Zealand Herald, Radio New Zealand, News Talk ZB and The Post to close their ears and say, no, we can't have any kind of bad press for Mark Mitchell because basically, well, he's a cis white man in charge of a ministerial portfolio, and therefore he must be protected from criticism from all democratic voices, and he must go on to do this again. And yeah, sure, I mean, some kind of like half-hearted written apology, maybe a text, would suffice, and there'd be no accountability at all from Mark Mitchell. And the media's role here is just to kind of protect him when he does make these racist slurs. Well, I'm proud to say that one of our readers here can be seen to have been the person that allegedly or suggests that she tipped TPM off to this gross racist slur from Mark Mitchell. And well done, Gemini Queen. But on top of that, what Radio New Zealand did see as news was some kind of like opportunity to attack people with brown skin. So here is the good old Radio New Zealand report on how the Maori Party, TPM, will have to face a public hearing of the Privileged Committee. Very privileged indeed. Some people call it privileges, but I call it the Privileged Committee because they're basically almost all white, apart from the ACT member on the Privileges Committee, and they're all very privileged and they're sitting in judgment. But let's look at public hearings because, you know, it's not that often that someone gets the full gaze of the media, the punishment, the judgment of media. And it's only really reserved for usually people who are female or someone whose skin isn't white enough. And I think that's what we're seeing here. I went to the Vimeo page to look at the history of all previous public hearings of the Privileged Committee. And as you can see in this photo here, there's only been two in recent times. One was for Jan Tinetti, and she was a Labour female MP, so she qualified for a public lashing where all the media were present, and it was lead news on TVNZ. And then we had the recent case of the Haka. So you see, it's all about the colour of your skin, and really, if that's not there, then it's whether you're a female. There was a big kick up this morning on Radio New Zealand where, if you listen to this excerpt, Winston Paters went into an interview with Corin Dan and completely lost his marbles, breaking the law by threatening to shut down the funding for Radio New Zealand. Here it is.
That because your opponents, the Greens and Labour, but certainly the Greens, and have argued that you are just importing a culture war here as a distraction from your failure to deal with issues that New Zealanders do care about, like a failing health system and the cost of living crisis.
Yeah, well, this is so typical that RNZ in your form would start putting their arguments.
Well, that's my job, Mr. Peters, to put up an argument. I'm sorry, you're not going to accuse me of putting up their arguments and believing in them. I'm the devil's advocate here, and I put up the argument for you to answer.
I thought your job was to hear both sides of the story.
It is, and if anyone who looks at this
Not
interview will
use it-
see that is exactly what I've been doing,
Well,
and I'm
you
trying
can't
to get
help-
you to
you
answer
can't
that
help
question.
yourself. You're doing most of the talking, aren't you? The fact is you're paid for by the taxpayer, and sooner or later we're going to cut that water off too because you're an abuse on the taxpayer. You're not hearing both sides of the story. You keep on putting the argument of the woke left. You're a disgrace to the mainstream media.
Wow. So Winston Peters, going to shut down Radio New Zealand, going to shut down free speech. I mean, I think shutting down free speech and media is one of the core beliefs of New Zealand First, and I guess that's why Winston Peters said that he would defund Radio New Zealand if they weren't going to just, let him speak without any kind of challenge. So there we have it. It's pretty disgusting stuff. A little later on, Ingrid Hipkiss interviewed Christopher Hipkins, and Chris Hipkins said the following.
Just finally on that issue, on that interview, I'm not sure if you heard it with Mr. Peters, but he did come very close to saying he was going to turn off funding for RNZ and accused RNZ of being biased. Did you hear that, and do you have any comment on that?
I think that's utterly unacceptable behaviour. In fact, he's broken the law if that is what he is doing. The law is very clear in that area, and if Winston Peters has fallen foul of that by threatening to cut funding, then the Prime Minister is duty-bound to do something about it.
Yeah, that's right. So it's up to Christopher Luxon to actually do something, to act, to take this guy down. We've also learned this morning that Christopher Luxon will attend the Pope's funeral, which is scheduled for Saturday at 8 p.m. our time. And I think that the point here was that he didn't want to come home to all the problems and face it like a prime minister or a leader, but would rather like lounge around and kick about in Europe taking photos. So it's to be expected that he will just extend his basic photo op tour and really do nothing for any of us, especially the homeless, the poor, the vulnerable, or people waiting for some kind of health service back here in New Zealand. So that was just a brief G News update. I hope you're all doing well and had a great Easter holiday, and I'll talk to you all again soon.